always that exciting little bit at the beginning where you're like, are we live? I think we are. Things are happening, and it is officially Cocktails and Fishtales time here with the Harbor Wild Watch crew. So you might recognize this beautiful face. We have Carly Bester with us tonight. We're so excited. It feels like such a full circle moment to have our previous Cocktails and Fishtales host joining us as tonight's presenter. I'm, of course, Stina Troyer, your science specialist, and I'm just delighted to, be hosting this event tonight. And so for those of you tuning in, if you want to let us know in the comment section where you're watching from, maybe what cocktail you're sipping on, maybe it's a mocktail, that's cool too. But we're going to let Carly tell us her favorite cocktail and share a fishtale with us before I kind of give the layout of how this event's going to go tonight. So Carly, can you share those things with us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the sweet hello. I am drinking my current favorite cocktail tonight, which is a seltzer. I've been into seltzers lately. This is by Shell House. It is the only seltzer that I actually enjoy, and it's quite lovely. It's light, it's refreshing. What more could you want from a drink?
Sure. Do we get sponsored by them? Like, this feels like a sponsoring opportunity. Like, okay, yeah, we like that.
House. They're delicious. They are delicious. And my fishtail this evening, I was thinking about this, and one of my favorite beach memories was a couple summers ago. My mom and I planned a trip to Alaska around the lowest tide of the year. So we were out beach walking at 5 or 6 in the morning for 3 or 4 days in a row across Southeast Alaska, checking out the wildlife out there. And it just was a really delightful time with my mom. I was seeing new wildlife on the beach. We were getting up early. It was a fun adventure moment that we got to enjoy. So that's my happy little fishtail.
That is magical. If you're curious about the life of Southeast Alaska, I was able to share a couple live videos from the shores out at Cape Decision Lighthouse on QU Island. So yeah, it feels like a very rugged, it's like familiar, but unfamiliar. So the sea life of Alaska is incredible.
So cool.
Glad you got to play with that and have that experience. So for those of you watching now, again, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you want to write in the comments any questions, we'll be fielding those questions Carly's way at the end of the presentation. So you get to have your questions answered live if you're tuning in tonight. And we would love to have those at the end, because tonight we get to learn all about, I guess, adventure filmmaking, environmental filmmaking. And there's a big helicopter flying by my window right now. I don't know if you can hear that. Gotta love Zoom, y'all. Well, if I keep going, okay. Hopefully that passed. But yeah, we're so excited to have Carly here to talk more about her adventures in Western Media Company, as well as all the other cool videography things she gets to do. I do have one plug before we start for Harbor Wild Watch, and that is that we will be hosting our Make Waves event. This will be our 7th annual fundraiser. So it's a big deal for our small organization, and we'll be hosting that on Thursday, the 23rd, and that will be over Zoom, so you can register for that link. And we have really awesome little swag boxes, so if you want to add a gift box to that package, it'll come with directions for making the signature cocktail of the night. So I figure, we're here for Cocktails and Fishtales. Let's talk about the Salish Sea Smash. Going to be featuring a heritage distilling company, the Cocoa Bomb, as well as some strawberries. I don't know. It sounds delicious. You'll want to be there for it. And it, of course, includes our annual pin, which this year is a crab with a little syringe. So crab jab. If you haven't got vaccinated yet, now's a great time to do that, as well as get in on that swag box. So cheers to that. And with no further ado, I'll be doing some more announcements at the end, but let's turn it over to Carly Bester to talk about her latest documentary and just adventures in filmmaking in general. So Carly, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna pin your screen and turn it over. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Stina. and I am going to go ahead and do the technology side of things here. Start my screen sharing for y'all. I will also plug Make Waves for Stina. It's a fantastic event, you guys, and it's super, super fun. Highly recommend. But tonight I am talking about going beneath the Narrows. So we're gonna do a little behind the scenes look for 700 Feet Down, my latest documentary about the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. We'll be seeing some clips from the film, talking stories behind the scenes, all of those fun things. I want to thank Stina and the whole Harbor Wild Watch team for having me here and letting me kind of come full circle with this. It's incredibly fun, and I'm excited to be sharing with you all out there. But before I fully dive in tonight, I want to take a moment to raise my glass, or my can rather, in memory of Steve Henry. For those of you who maybe don't know Steve or didn't know Steve, he was a friend and volunteer of Harbor Wild Watch who gave his time to educate others about photography and the environment. He was my friend, he was my mentor, and he unfailingly had the patience and the enthusiasm to answer all of my photo questions. And it was always with the biggest smile and the best laugh. You could hear Steve's laugh from across the room. And during my time at Harbor Wild Watch, when I was in Stina's shoes, I led many cocktails and Fishtales programs that were pre-pandemic in person. And Steve was always that friendly face I could look to when I was nervous. And he would always just flash a big smile. And at the end of the presentation, he was always the one who had the most invested and interested questions in what the presenter had to say. So tonight, I just want to cheers to Steve and encourage everyone to raise your glass in memory of Steve Henry. So we are going beneath the Narrows, as the title implies, for this in-depth look at the awesome and fascinating Northwest legend of the bridge that collapsed here in Tacoma, Washington. The bridge's collapse is steeped in some really fascinating stories that we'll talk about. We're going to debunk the giant octopus legend that some of you might be familiar with, and consequently just talk about these alien creatures that live beneath the bridge. We'll take a look at some eyewitness accounts from folks who saw the bridge collapse, and then we'll go under the bridge for some scuba footage, exploring the wreckage and talking about the ecological impact and importance of artificial reefs. And at the very end, we'll wrap up with some important and maybe not so important lessons that I learned as a filmmaker doing documentary work and work around the bridge in crazy waters and currents and weather. I might be a familiar face to some of you, as Stina mentioned, but I also might be digitally meeting some of you for the first time. So hi, hello, I'm Carly. I had the joy of working with Harbor Wild Watch first as an intern and then as a communications specialist for a few years. And these lovely ladies, they didn't think I was crazy when I suggested my first film idea with them, which was documenting wintertime community science beach monitoring at night in freezing cold conditions. I wanted to just capture this whole story. And this short documentary, Salish Sea After Dark, premiered at 4 film festivals nationally and internationally and really propelled my love for outdoor filmmaking. But admittedly, I have always loved telling stories. My family can tell you that it all started with this pink plastic film Barbie camera when I was a kid, which I was stoked the internet still actually had a picture of, because I took some killer photos of rhododendrons with this pink camera. And this morphed into the cheapest point and shoot camera I could find as a preteen, film photography my freshman year with my dad's old Yashica camera, followed by the pursuit of my bachelor's degree in visual journalism, and then a mixture of different positions working photo and design work for nonprofits across Washington. A few years back, I got my master's in environmental journalism, and then I found myself at Harbor Wild Watch. And Harbor Wild Watch led to some wonderful opportunities, including partnering with board member Peter Bortel, who I think is watching tonight. Hello, Peter. On a film that we decided to call 700 Feet Down. Now, Peter approached me with the idea of putting together a film that showcased the Tacoma Narrows Bridge wreckage through scuba footage, historic footage, and firsthand accounts of the bridge collapse. We began that project in October 2019, thinking that we'd just put together this kind of short 25-minute documentary, and that instead grew to a 45-minute documentary that was completed in early February 2021. 700 Feet Down grew into this full documentation of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, from the ecosystem that grew from the wreckage beneath it, to the source of historical and physics information, to encapsulating all these firsthand stories from the collapse, and even talking to someone who worked maintenance on the bridge and knows it intimately. So I thought I'd start tonight's presentation with sharing the trailer for the film with you all to get a feel for what it is about.
You're diving essentially a time capsule from a forgotten time. There are not a lot of people around today that were on this planet the day the bridge was being built.
Let's see, I must have been about 17, 18 years old then. When we heard that the bridge had gone down, they decided to all jump in my little filler, and so we drove out there.
It was one of my early fantastic experiences.
All of that debris still remains underneath the bridge for the most part and has become a dive site. It's a very difficult dive site to get to because of the swiftly moving water and the very short period of slack time there.
Nature in this area has just a tremendous ability to take over. You have a man-made structure like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that collapsed into the water. Very quickly, the ocean took it over. The ocean made it part of the habitat.
People come from all over the world and all over the country to learn more about that particular bridge. Story, not something I love, is that we're actually using historic data to make the future better and learn from the mistakes of the past.
So that's the trailer for the film. And I'll be, like I said, sharing a few clips with you all throughout the night to look at kind of what is going on in this film and talk about the different components of it. But I am curious, before I dive much further, no pun intended, into this, if you're watching live on Facebook, in the comment section, let us know how many of you already know the story of GallopingGertie and have heard of this legend with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Maybe put a little raise your hand emoji in there, or an octopus emoji. If you know, you know. Like many Washingtonians, I grew up knowing two things about the bridge. Number one, that it collapsed dramatically a long, long time ago. And number two, the biggest octopus in the world lived under the bridge, which I blame my brother for this one, because every time we crossed the bridge, he would tell this story unfailingly, just be like, the largest octopus lives under the bridge. It's under there. It's down deep. And both of these stories are kind of true, but they're kind of false. It did collapse dramatically. In fact, it collapsed only 4 months after it was built. When we screened the 25-minute version of 700 Feet Down, it was on the bridge's 80th anniversary from when it collapsed. So while it did happen a while ago, it didn't happen like a long, long time ago. And It's one thing that I really like to acknowledge, because 700 feet down really does hone in on how we can learn from our mistakes of the past and our history, both long time ago history and more recent history. So the bridge collapsed about 80 years ago. And that octopus legend, we're going to get to a little bit later. Just hold tight for that one. So the
Carly,
Tacoma
I'm gonna pop in and let you know that we've got some people responding that yes, and I have to say that me, Rachel, and Lindsay all really enjoyed watching your film. So we kind of knew about it before, but now we feel like we know even more. So
there you go. And so you can know this legend and maybe only know bits and pieces or a little bit about it. And there's so many different stories within it. So I love that. And thanks for commenting, guys.
And I'll add that Eileen is saying it was a subject of discussion in my college physics class. Harmonic resonance.
Yeah.
So people know.
It's been taught in classes not only nationally, but across the globe, which I love that it's a school lesson too. And it's a lesson in, engineering failures, but also we know it in the Pacific Northwest, and it is also around the world. People know about this bridge, which is fun. And the nickname GallopingGertie has kind of an interesting story. It came from the way that the bridge moved. And it was named as such by the construction workers, actually, because when the winds were strong, the bridge deck would gallop and move in the wind. After its opening in July 1940, residents viewed it as both this kind of like amusement park ride, but also a much needed gateway to the peninsula area, because prior to the bridge being built, the Key Peninsula was only accessible by ferry. So you were limited by a ferry timetable to get to and from where you needed to go over here. You could row a boat if you wanted to, have personal watercraft to get across, or you could drive all the way around, and it was a drive. So the building of the bridge was a big deal to residents, and it was very much anticipated and very much celebrated. And the bridge moved because of the conditions that happen in this particular area. So the Tacoma Narrows is pretty notorious for its weather conditions. Because it's in a channel, the wind often whips through the area. On the particular day that the bridge fell, it was gusting, I believe, 42, 43 miles an hour. So quite strong winds. And yes, the construction workers did notice the movement, so much so that they gave it the nickname, but they weren't too concerned about the movement. No one really was too concerned about the movement because the bridge was a suspension bridge. It was built to have a little bit of give to it. So the bridge collapsed during a windstorm in November 1940, but the rebuild actually wasn't finished until 1950. And that was in part because of the US's involvement in World War II and the demand for metal at that time, but there also was a little bit of financial and engineering drama happening on there. So the question of why and aerodynamics is something that I feel is maybe a little bit better explained by a physics professor. And I'm going to share a clip from one who we interviewed in the film and have his explanation.
Nobody was thinking about aerodynamics at this point. Instead, they were thinking about designing suspension bridges that were lighter and cheaper and more flexible and more elegant looking. Interestingly enough, the original design for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge used what was called an open truss girder, and this design allows air to flow through. But when bridge designer Leon Moiseff was brought in, and Moiseff was a very well-respected designer involved with the Golden Gate Bridge, but Moiseff modified the design in a couple of ways. And one thing that he changed was he replaced this open truss girder with a narrower steel plate girder. And the steel plate girder didn't allow air to flow through it. When you have a solid object like a steel plate girder and it starts to twist, the airflow pattern has to change significantly, a lot more than it would if the structure were just an open truss. So these aerodynamic forces came into play, and unfortunately, they happened to be in the same direction at the same time as the structural restoring forces. And that meant that there was too much force pulling the bridge back to its equilibrium position, and so it overshot. And as it overshot, it twisted further. And twisting further, it increased the forces even more.
So what I love and learn from that bit of the story is that the original bridge design actually did allow air to flow through. And I don't totally want to speculate, but I'm going to speculate. That bridge may have actually stayed up because of that design, but because they brought a new designer in who wanted to do it a little bit cheaper, a little bit more elegant, didn't quite realize what the impact would be. This was 1940. The bridge ended up being what it is and the legend that we know it is today. Speaking of legends, every good folklore story or every good historical story has a couple of myths and legends with it to throw in that dramatic flair. And the top 3 questions I would get when I talked about this documentary, and that I still get today when I talk about this documentary, are: 1, did you see that giant octopus again, that lives under the bridge? And 2, there was this poor dog named Tubby who died when the bridge collapsed, and the car that Tubby was in actually fell into the water and no one knows where it's at. And it is sadly true that a Cocker Spaniel named Tubby was the one casualty in the bridge collapse, and he was in the car that fell into the water. There were attempts made to rescue Tubby from the car, but he reportedly was too scared to leave the car and actually tried to bite those who attempted to rescue him out of fear. Photos and stories would later weave together the story of the owner, Leonard Coatsworth, who tried to coax Tubby from the car. When Tubby wouldn't come, Leonard had to flee for his own life and crawl on his hands and knees, ripping and tearing his trousers to make it off of the bridge before it collapsed. He had been driving to his cabin at Arletta with Tubby and a couple other things in the back of his car. And although the bridge had been shut down for the violent way it began to move in the winds, he was still crossing it when the bridge actually began to crumble. So there was only that one casualty of Tubby. And the octopus legend, here we go. Rumor has it that legend could have begun from how big giant octopus grow. Giant Pacific octopus are the largest octopus in the world, who are also native to our waters. But there also was an obscure sport at that time in the Puget Sound called Octopus Wrestling, which is exactly what it sounds like. People will go down to the depths, wrestle an octopus out, try to master the octopus in a way. And, you know, while it is true that these giant Pacific octopus are considered the largest species of octopus in the world, with the biggest ever recorded being over 300 pounds, you'll probably learn from the ladies at Harper Wild Watch at some point that octopus only live for 3 to 4 years. So there isn't this single old octopus lurking under the bridge. It is possible, though, that the wreckage created this perfect habitat for octopus, which has kind of combined all of these elements together into this fabulous myth. I think my favorite story from the bridge as well, my favorite octopus myth, try saying that 3 times fast, is that an octopus actually tore down the bridge. It didn't fall from wind, an octopus brought it down. Which brings me to our next clip and a bit of a dramatic retelling of what this might have looked like if it were true.
It's a great legend. It's really not true, but it's so much more exciting, right?
Seems to be a pretty prolific story. A lot of people that talk to me find out that I'm a diver. If I talk about, I've dove under the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, one of the first things that people tend to ask is, have you seen that giant octopus that's down there? You heard about it. Or I had a friend that was a diver, and he told me stories about the massive octopus that lives down there.
What's funny is other divers mentioned this to me when we said that we were going to go dive this bridge. The octopus's lifespans are 4 years. So whatever giant octopus was there is long gone.
I have seen larger octopus. They're the 10 to 15 foot long range, not quite the mythical 80, 90 foot octopus that some people have heard about in the stories. Usually they're tucked up into their dens. This is usually a good spot for them because of all the concrete wreckage, the original parts of the bridge that have fallen down and kind of formed a lot of natural den space that both the octopus and wolf eels seem to really like.
I think that the legend of the giant octopus under the bridge actually comes from those days of octopus wrestling. And it was actually a thing where teams of two would go diving. They'd have to find an octopus, bring it to shore within a certain period of time. And there were these contests even in the 30s, 40s, 50s for people to try to wrestle these octopuses and master the octopus. So probably legends of those giant octopuses living under the Narrows Bridge come largely from that amazing feat. Some of these octopuses were quite large. I mean, when you actually extend leg to leg, I think the largest one was about 20 feet across.
As an animal, it doesn't really get any more interesting than an octopus. They're incredibly intelligent, they're interactive, they're curious, and they're completely alien. When you look at them and they look at you, you can really see them trying to figure out what you are and what you're doing. And that's such a rewarding interaction with any animal of intelligence like that chooses to interact with you. Is an indescribable feeling.
That last clip of the octopus essentially soaring through the water gets me every time. It's so beautiful. And octopus, as you hear one of our divers say, are just alien creatures who you look them in the eye, they're trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing. They're so cool. They're so cool. Moving from octopus to folks who actually saw the bridge collapse rather than an octopus pulling down the bridge, supposedly. One of the biggest puzzle pieces of this story was how to find individuals who had seen the bridge collapse or perhaps had memories of the bridge being built in 1940. And every story included in this film actually came from word of mouth. Peter and I reached out to friends and family to see if anyone had a family member or a friend who may have a story. And boy, did they have some stories. Everyone seems to have a bridge story when you talk about the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and you're talking to someone who is local or familiar with it. In the film itself, there are 4 eyewitnesses who saw the bridge collapse or had some association with it, but I heard from way more folks than that who had bits and pieces or knew of someone or had some sort of story to share. In the film, we have Virginia, who remembers driving over the bridge as a young girl. Dale's mom feared this wave that was caused by the debris in the collapse would wash over their home on Salmon Beach. We had a gentleman named Swede in the plaid shirt pictured here who skipped class in high school and shuttled his buddies to the site after the bridge collapsed. And Kay, in the lower corner, actually had very fond memories of going out as a family activity and watching the original bridge be built. So even today, with folks who maybe hadn't seen the bridge collapse, there's a bridge story, or a family member who has a bridge story. I even have my own bridge story with my brother telling me lies about the octopus. But with these eyewitness accounts, I went through hours of historical footage for the film. And I really have to give a shout out to Stephanie Lyle at the Harbor History Museum, who you saw in the last clip, who spent hours with me going through footage, going through relics and old items the Harbor History Museum houses, and talking through this story, making sure I got the history correct on this film. If you haven't been to the Harbor History Museum in Gig Harbor, I highly recommend a visit to see some of the actual bridge wreckage up close in person. You don't have to be a diver to see it, but also see some of the relics from their collection as well. The University of Washington Library Special Collections was also super invaluable for footage. They had hours of personal footage that had been donated from folks in the area that I got to look through, and I discovered some really incredible gems from their collection, one of which you see in the trailer, which is helicopter footage of the bridge not long after it had collapsed. So someone took their helicopter up or hired a helicopter, I'm not sure of the full story. You see the part of the bridge still dangling down from above, and there's no footage that I've ever found that is similar to that. So the University of Washington Library was so excited that this footage was going to be used and see the light of day finally, because it had been in their collection for a little while. So, I mean, really in reflection, the historical aspects of this was one of the coolest parts to pull together. Don't get me wrong, the scuba footage and the wreckage footage is absolutely fantastic, and more on that later, but preserving the stories and footage was a total honor and joy. And most conversations about the bridge were simply getting to listen to this well-loved story being told and memories being shared, and again, lessons that we can learn from our past. They were a reminder and continue to be a reminder that our history is a part of us here in present day, and that there's rich history all around us here in Washington. And as a documentary filmmaker, I say this a lot, it is a complete honor to be trusted with someone's story. They are sharing it and trusting that you will do it justice and that you will share it appropriately, which is a big deal, especially today and now. It's a big responsibility too, and it's one that I never take lightly. So this film certainly would not be what it is without these firsthand accounts and historical footage. And to give you a little preview of one of these firsthand accounts, I'm going to share Swede's story with you about skipping class to go and watch the bridge collapse.
We got on a hill looking right at the Narrows Bridge, and where the piece had broke off, and just this big long runway was still down into the water. And it was quite a few boats on the sound at that time, and they were picking up, I don't know what they were doing down there, but there were a bunch of boats down there. And let's see, I must have been about 17, 18 years old then. And I was supposed to be in class at that time. And I had a little Model A I used to run around with. And when we heard that a bridge had gone down, they decided to all jump in my little filler, and so we drove out there.
Skip school? Did you skip class?
That's it.
So Swede actually passed away last summer, and I was able to talk with his family in the aftermath and share the full interview footage with them, because he shared a lot of stories with me. I got to hear about World War II and ships and boats and a lot of different things. And that really goes back to the honor of being a filmmaker, of documenting stories and preserving history with them, right? And being able to share that with the family. So this film is in part in memory of Swede and his story and his quirkiness and personality. We're circling back to diving the bridge. We're going to go underneath it now. But before I go any further, I really should caveat, I'm not a diver. One of these days, I will give in to Stina's ribbing and actually get certified. But I am not a diver, putting that out there now. However, my
Carly,
co-director.
I'm holding you to that.
I need to get certified. I know. It's not just Stina, it's also my co-director who's ribbed me a little bit because he is a diver. And he, like Stina, is very connected with the dive community and was able to find some divers in the area. So through this connection, we met John Sanis, Mike Brickman, Jared Jensen, and Aaron Moser, and they all were willing to go down and capture the footage for us. So we had 3 technical divers on the film and 1 shallows diver. And we'll start with the shallows around the bridge because what many folks don't realize, I'm sure Stina already knows this too, but what many folks don't realize is that the area surrounding the bridge is full of colorful life. And the shallow section of the film and that dive itself was actually the last section of the documentary that we filmed, with Aaron diving in October 2020 to capture the ecological life and discuss how it's changed over the years and bring some color into the film. What's kind of our goal there, and to show that it's more than just a wreckage site, right? There's a lot of stuff around the sides of the bridge as well. So this dive, although it was the last dive, it actually ended up being the first bit of the film that we opened with to set the scene and tell the story. So I'm going to share a clip now of the shallows section that Aaron filmed.
Nature in this area has just a tremendous ability to take over. You have a man-made structure like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that collapsed into the water, and very quickly the ocean took it over. The ocean made it part of the habitat. And now an area that would just generally be more wide open and not very much shelter for the larger animals now supports the entire range of life. My earliest memories are at the beach, out here diving in Puget Sound. Having the opportunity to go out there and see those things for myself has been just an immense gift. A lot of people that either don't know or my earliest memories are at the beach, out here diving in Puget Sound. Having the opportunity to go out there and see those things for myself has been just an immense gift. A lot of people that either don't know or in some cases don't care about what's below the ocean. I found it very useful to be able to capture those things on video and then share those images with people. It helps them to both appreciate and understand what actually lives under the ocean, why it's important that we protect it. Shallower dives are generally going to be a lot more manageable, a lot safer than the deeper dives. When you're doing dives in that 100, 150, 200 foot range, things can happen very quickly. They can go bad very quickly. So you need to make sure that your equipment is well maintained, you're on top of it, you're monitoring all of the equipment. And in the case of what we're doing, you're actually down there filming as well, so that tends to take up a lot of your focus at the same time. So it can be quite tricky doing
So that's a little bit of foreshadowing there at the end for what happened when we actually went deeper beneath the bridge. So because of the depth and complicated conditions under the Narrows, it's about 230 feet deep to the wreckage site. The wreckage is considered a technical dive. So our other three divers, John, Mike, and Jared, are incredibly familiar with diving wrecks across the Pacific Northwest, and they put in a lot of work and a lot of practice dives in the area to bring this footage to light. Literally, John and Mike's roles during this film were to light the scene because it is completely pitch black down there. So they brought down two 30,000 lumen lights each and created ambient light over each piece of wreckage, while Jared filmed and panned over the wreckage. And all three were using motorized dive scooters to navigate the site. They also were using rebreathers to dive, which are a very different system than using standard open circuit scuba tanks. Rebreathers recirculate the breathing gas by using chemical scrubbers of a sort to absorb the CO2 and a tank of pure oxygen to replenish the oxygen. So the biggest advantages to using rebreathers are an extended gas endurance, low noise levels, lack of bubbles, but they are a lot more complicated than open circuit, which further adds to the technicalities of a dive like this. And each diver also brought down extra tanks and of course dove in a dry suit because it's quite cold here in the Puget Sound. So we actually did 2 dives of the wreckage site with John, Mike, and Jared. And during the first dive, everything that could go wrong did. The divers entered the water from a dive boat where the captain grappled onto the wreckage, and the divers were to follow this grapple hook's rope down to the bottom at slack tide until they found the wreckage, which sounds pretty straightforward. You time it right, you grapple onto the wreckage, you follow the rope down. But because of the swift current in the Narrows, the bottom is actually not consistent, which means that occasionally the wreckage will actually get covered with the cobbles and sand and gravel down there from the sweeping current in the water, which makes it impossible to actually grapple onto and follow a rope down. And if you're missing slack tide, you're diving in a raging river. Essentially, the currents get so swift that they will just move you away from the area. And it doesn't help that that slack tide on the surface is different than slack tide on the bottom. So on our first dive, our captain was struggling to grapple onto the bottom. And by the time he hooked on, we were really tight on our window to reach the bottom at slack tide. John, Mike, and Jared struggled in the current because we only had a few minutes of slack tide. And then while they were down there, there was an unexpected disc failure. So only some of the footage actually made it to the surface. And then John got separated from the group during decompression when they came up to the surface. So we actually had a few minutes, which felt like an hour of panic, just trying to figure out where John was, and had to pick him up on the shore several miles south of the bridge. But when we dove the bridge the second time, all of us were super prepared and it went off flawlessly. And the footage turned out absolutely beautiful. So I'll share that with you all now and what the wreckage of the bridge looks like underneath the water.
Normally, this site's pretty undivable just because of the fact that the currents are extreme, especially at depth. Once you get into the middle of this channel at 150 feet, 160 feet, it's just too much to handle.
You have to find the appropriate section of the bridge to try to lower a grappling hook and pin the bridge so the divers have a reference point to go down. And the bottom is not consistent. So the gravel that's down there will move around on heavy tide days. And actually cover things up and then bring it back. You know, a month later, you'll find it again. So your grappling point might not work the first time because, well, there's nothing to hook to because it's covered up. I've been doing dive charters out here about 10 years now. I've been diving out here for 20. Long before we used a grappling hook, we would just go out, line up on a particular phone box on the bridge, gauge the drift, roll out of the boat, and then just free drop all the way to the bottom.
As we're getting down, like we get to the bottom and there's just absolutely nothing there. I was honestly pretty convinced we weren't gonna find it. But after a few minutes, we scooted right into this giant, it was probably 20 feet by 10 feet wide and probably 10 to 15 feet tall, just piling of something. And we found some roadway. We just kept finding small thing after small thing.
Our lives are filled with screens and input and talking and notifications, and being able to go underwater where all that just goes away becomes the most serene experience of your life.
I find it just so therapeutic and relaxing. On our rebreathers, there are no bubbles, so it's almost completely silent down there. It's just, you're one with nature, you're relaxed, you're breathing, you're just looking at really cool stuff.
So when you contrast that wreckage with the colorful shallows life, you can kind of see why we wanted to cover both areas, both the wreckage and the shallows. And that brings me almost to the end of the presentation tonight to touch briefly on artificial reefs. Because when the bridge collapsed, many didn't realize that it would create this unique habitat for life in the depths later. And artificial reefs, by definition, are man-made structures underwater, which are placed to encourage marine life in areas that generally have a featureless bottom. They can be intentional, so placed with a purpose to create this reef, or, like the bridge falling, they can be very unintentional debris that has fallen and created this new life. So in 700 Feet Down, we made a point to talk about how these reefs can benefit the ecosystem, but also completely change it. One of the biggest risks of these reefs is the potential for pollution and materials that can release chemical and nutrients that aren't naturally found in reef environments. And as you can imagine, this problem just intensifies when the reef is unintentional and created from human debris. And the bridge has actually been in trouble in recent years for this happening. So in 2004, 2 tons of cleaning grit, debris, and lead paint chips fell into the water while the Department of Transportation was cleaning it. This was a $21,000 fine that found that the Department of Transportation failed to consider options to actually capture the debris when they were cleaning it. And obviously lead from paint chips is toxic to the environment, but the grit and the grease cleaning also really didn't help the situation. In the film, we talked to a former maintenance lead on the bridge about the process of maintaining this landmark. And today, in 2021, maintenance practices are very strict in environmental impact to ensure that debris does not get left in the water. And on the note of artificial reefs, the massive girder sections, concrete rubble, and half a mile of roadway that are on the bottom now have created, as you saw, this habitat for sea stars, mussels, barnacles, You can see in some of the footage that the life at the bottom was quite large. You have lingcod lurking and giant barnacles on the rubble and rockfish swimming through. And really each animal in this environment has its role in the Puget Sound and the unique characteristics to them. So we're going to finish with one final clip of artificial reefs and also looking a little at bridge maintenance practices with some historical footage on the bridge.
There was all kinds of acorn barnacles all over it. There was kelp crabs and lingcod and rockfish just all swimming around it.
Fish were big down there. When you tend to have wreckage that's been down there for a while, they kind of grow into their own natural reef. Our artificial reefs can take, 5, 10, 25 years, but Gertie's been down there for almost 80 years. So some of the lings were probably 3 feet or so, maybe a little bigger.
The way that the natural bottom looks, there's really nothing for these anemones to grab onto. The reason that we need an artificial reef is because steel and concrete that's down there provides all these nooks and crannies and permanency that allows all of the life to hang on to and grow, that then provides food and shelter for all the other animals that are around there. And when you have human objects that have fallen into the water or wrecked into the water, you're like, this isn't supposed to be here, but now nature has recaptured it and repurposed it for its own end. And I think that is something that's really beautiful.
This is a different world. I mean, this is before EPA, I think. A lot of this is way a long time. I mean, so no, not much oversight. The release of painting and sandblasting on a bridge, you can't have that today. You shouldn't have had it back then, conceivably. I mean, the soil underneath the bridge has been cleaned up, but they had some cleanup. So when I hired on in '83, this was the life of that era from 1949, 1950 until about 2004. It was a 10-year painting cycle. An average day is a team of 2 painters makes 32 feet. Now 32 feet is 72 feet wide, and it's a truss, so it's about 25 feet tall, and it's got steel going everywhere. So, and you are just getting 32 feet east to west done. And that is, well, the majority of the work is cleaning and sandblasting. So you'll do that every day for about a month, and then you come back and paint it all, and then you move forward for another sections. And it would take me 10 years to get to a point where here I am back at this spot again.
So that little tidbit that Kip says at the end, that it took 10 years to go from point A and come all the way back to point B, really gives perspective for the length of this bridge, the scale of this bridge, how big it is, and touches on something that I don't think a lot of us think about, and that's what it takes to maintain this bridge and what kind of impact that has and has had on the environment. So to end this evening, I'm going to leave everyone with this great quote from the end of the film, which you will hear if you come to one of our screenings or perhaps purchase or rent the film on Amazon and Apple. Just a little plug there. But it's from Stephanie Lyle of the Harbor History Museum. And she said, "Sometimes the great failures lead to the greatest accomplishments. And if we don't acknowledge those failures, then we're not really looking toward the future and how we can abate those mistakes of the past." So for me, this film is really about looking at our past, how it can inform our present. And whether this is through ecological reflection or great engineering failures, how we take this lesson and apply it to our daily lives is key here. And this film shone a new light on our local history for me personally, how it's not only important to preserve that history, but that history is still very much here and alive with us today, living and showing us how we can move forward into the future. It was this great lesson on taking in our world with fresh eyes. And I think my only other lesson from this film was remembering to bring a microfiber cloth with me when I'm filmmaking, because my lens would inevitably get salt water on it wherever I went. So always bring that microfiber cloth. That's all I have for this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. To reach out to me and find out what I'm up to next, I have my email address and my website on here. 700 Feet Down is available on Amazon and Apple, but we do have some fun screenings coming up, one of which is in partnership with Harbor Wild Watch on October 8th. There's a super secret film festival. It's not so secret. I'm just not allowed to announce it quite yet. They are announcing tomorrow, and you'll hear what film festival it is tomorrow. It's here in Tacoma, hint, that this is going to be screening at on October 13th. And then we're also screening online with the Friday Harbor Film Festival and doing some Q&A stuff with them October 15th through 17th. So be sure to stay in the loop, check that out. We have a Facebook page as well that you can follow along and see more behind the scenes stuff and historical clips. But that's all I got. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments now.
Getting a little flood of heart emojis. And for those of you who tune in later, this of course will be posted in full at the end. But yeah, great job, Carly. That was so fun. I enjoyed watching the film, but it's extra fun seeing you explain the chunks as you go along. And so really, really fun. We have some fun questions from both Lindsay and Eileen coming in, but I'm going to steal the first question because I've got the mic, right? And I'm curious if you could tell us more about the title. You mentioned it's about 230 feet underwater. So what's up with this 700?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that we get a lot. 700 feet down came from Peter's realization, actually, that the top of the towers to the bottom of the Narrows is 700 feet. So the towers, when they collapsed from the very top, would have fallen 700 feet to the bottom. But it is only 230 feet deep, more or less, and not 700 like the title may make you think. But that's where that came from.
No, I love it. I think you'd explained that before, but I figured people might be still wondering.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That is one of the common questions we get.
Good. Lindsay is asking, what was the most challenging part of documenting this story for you? I hear you've learned a lesson already, right? Have those claws ready to wipe the salt water off your gear. Right. But yeah, other challenges in making this thing happen.
Yeah. Hey, Lindsay, thanks for tuning in. It's really hard to film on a small boat and keep your camera steady. The dive boat that we were on didn't have very much elbow room once you had 3 divers, a captain, and all the gear on it. So actually being able to get the right angle, whether that was kind of crawling up top or standing from the side, was really difficult to do in a steady fashion. So on the first shoot, it was just me filming all of this happening, and I kind of wedged myself in a corner with my tripod and try to do that. And I think by the end, I was just freehanding all of the shots and hoping I could stabilize them later as the boat rocked back and forth and the wind was whipping through. I should also note that first shoot was in the winter, so weather conditions weren't ideal. It was raining, you had saltwater splash, it was windy, all of that was happening. The second shoot was, if I remember right, calmer weather, and I actually had my partner Tanner filming as well, so we were able to divvy up and split those shots and have some more methods going into it, knowing this small space, and filming on a boat was going to be a challenge to stabilize that footage and actually get the shots that we needed. The divers also were really great to work with for getting extra shots. So like the jumping in shot, here's movie magic secret. We filmed a couple of times from the water, from the top. We had the divers get back in the boat and jump into the water. And they were very kind to do that to make sure we got the angles that we needed to stitch all of that together. But definitely filming on the boat was a new learning curve and a challenge for me.
I was really liking one of your transitions where it goes from like above the water to underwater and then boom, octopus. So very, very well put together. I'm curious about the octopus footage, knowing as a diver, right, I mostly see GPOs, giant Pacific octopus, tucked into those dens. So how did you get all this incredible footage? The one you mentioned that, you know, makes your skin tingle of it gliding through water.
Pouring through the water. That was all filmed.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, that was all filmed by luck in the area by Aaron Mosier. And he has, I don't know how many dives Aaron has done. He's a very talented filmmaker, knows how to handle it underwater, and apparently knows how and where to find octos and how to get shots like that. So those really dynamic and beautiful shots of the octopus were filmed by him. Again, movie magic here. Here's the other secret. They were not all filmed on that shallows dive. Those came from a couple of different dives that we did stitch in there for that. He did good though. I'm not sure how he found those octos, and we do have the one shot in there of the octopus in the den as well, and that is, like Stina said, where you normally see them, tucked up and not really out in the open. So that soaring with octopus footage he has was just stunning, and we are so happy that we were able to include it in the film and that he somehow was able to capture that. But great question about the octopus footage.
Well, thank you for sharing your movie magic tips. It's fun to know. I'm gonna look over here and read a question from Eileen. She's wondering, regarding slack tide, does the duration vary throughout the month/lunar cycle, or is it always the same? How do you know / determine how long a slack tide will be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it as simply as I can. Tide charts. Really paying attention to what the tide is doing on any day and in any season, low tide, high tide, when is slack tide. And then timing that approximately. I mentioned that slack is different at the surface and at the bottom. So if you know slack at the surface is going to be at, say, 10 a.m. for a round number, approximating the exact timing, or not exact, but the timing that it could be at the bottom, and gauging that with, okay, slack tide at the surface is at 10, so we need to grapple instead at 9:40, and give ourselves that buffer room because it's going to take this much time to get down. We want to hit slack. We want to have this much time at the bottom. It's a big math equation that the divers and the captain worked together to pull off. And like I said, that first dive, we didn't do a great job of pulling it off. We didn't approximate the time. It took us longer to grapple than expected. And by the time they got down on the bottom, they were drifting despite having motorized scooters because those currents are so swift down there. So the second time, I think we actually gave ourselves quite a bit of buffer time. It was very chill and casual, grappling onto it and planning that out. But tide charts are your friend. They're your friend for figuring out and approximating when that will be in the Tacoma Narrows and beyond, wherever you're looking.
Yeah, and I know just with the lunar cycle part, we'll add that.
Oh, yes.
Spring tides, where you have a new moon or a full moon, you'll get the more extreme tidal changes. So diving on a quarter moon, and also diving, like I think you mentioned you were diving in October.
Yeah.
Like a month where the tides, just in general, you don't get the really low lows and high highs. So wherever we're at in our planetary spin, yeah, I know October is a good time for diving those kind of weird sites that are often more current dependent.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
for
good answer for tide charts. Eileen, I hope we did your question justice.
Also, hi, Eileen.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Yeah. Another question from Lindsay, which is a great question. Do you have any other films in the works? What else? What other projects are you working on, Miss Carly?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, for asking. I am in the final stages of a film that follows two female stand-up paddleboarders who competed in the 70-48 race from Tacoma to Port Townsend. So it's a 70-mile human-powered race that takes place in the span of 48 hours. And these ladies totally kicked butt and paddled it, but also had a much bigger story to tell. So this film follows their adventure, but also takes a look at how these ladies are moms and athletes. We talk about female marginalization. We talk about water sports and the community through them. We talk about mental and physical health. All of those things are kind of propelled by this sport. And this film is going to be really cool. It's really special. We have a small team assembled to bring it to life, and we're talking about some really hard things and difficult topics in the film, but topics that I personally feel really need to be talked about and that I'm excited to talk about and share with these two ladies. And it has some cool potential and will be releasing in 2022. Keep everyone posted on that. We're hoping to do a film festival run with it and looking at some other potential outlets for it, and just talking about women in the outdoors and adventuring and challenges that both men and women face in these spaces and in everyday life. So it's a cool one. It's a really cool one. It's a little emotional as well, but it's been such a joy to work on the last handful of months, and I can't wait to share it.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I can't wait to see that. And speaking of emotional, I also wanted to just say thank you so much for mentioning Steve. He's got a soft spot in all of our hearts, and so it was really sweet to remember him, and also sweet. It sounds like you got to celebrate some really cool guys tonight. So thanks for bringing
absolutely. Cheers to Steve tonight. And
cheers.
He was friend and mentor to the whole Harbor Wild Watch team and holds a special place in all of our hearts.
All beach popsicles from now on are in honor of Steve. So cheers, cheers, cheers. Yeah. We have another question, but I just want to put a shout out for those of you with any burning wonders. Now's a good time to get those questions in the comments so we can get those Carly's way so she can answer them. But we have another one tuning in. I believe it's Tacey. What was your favorite part of the journey in documenting the film?
That's such a fun question. Thank you. I think I kind of mentioned it a little in the film, and it's a slightly unexpected answer probably, but the history aspect was really, really fun. Sitting down and just listening to people's stories. As a documentarian, it's what I'm lucky enough to do, but then you kind of take that to the next level with their memories of this bridge that I cross over almost every single day and how it collapsed, and having that time in that space to interview folks about that history was so cool. And then having it be my job to sort through historic footage as well just was a total joy. There was admittedly a lot to slog through. However, when you found a really quirky clip, like the helicopter clip, maybe that's not so quirky, but there was another one that you see briefly in the trailer of someone crossing the bridge, and there's this wagon on the side of the bridge with like a cow that was pulling it, like literally not a horse-drawn wagon, but a cow-drawn wagon. It's 1940, and I didn't see it the first time I watched it, and the second time I noticed it, I was like, what the heck? There's a wagon? This is 1940? So just those little things that you find in the process and hear about in the process. And the response to this film has been such a joy to share with people, because like I said, everybody has a bridge story. They have some bit of the bridge that they want to share, that they want to talk about. They know the bridge story maybe, and want to talk about that, or they learned about it in their 6th grade blah 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 class, science class, physics class, their college class. We've had folks from the school was in Florida, where they showed it to their classroom and used it as an educational material piece. That just blew me away, right? That could be in a classroom and helping educate kids. So it's been really, really cool to be part of that. I guess I have several favorite parts. Sorry, I answered that question. I cheated a little.
It's really hard to have a hierarchy. I feel like general highlights is a great way to answer.
Yep.
Thank you so much for sharing, Carly. Well, it's looking like we have answered all the questions that have been coming through the comments. I'm glad you've already brought up, I was going to ask, when are you getting scuba certified? It sounds like it's going to be soon. So thank you for being on top of that.
Yep.
Hold you to it. Some more love is just pouring in through the comments. So really, really appreciate you coming out here. And of course, plug to go watch this film, whether you buy it off of Amazon or Apple, or go to one of these screenings coming up. It sounds so, it's fun to see. So thank you, Carly, so much. Any last things you want to leave us on before I go over some Harbor Wild Watch announcements?
I think just thank you to the Harbor Wild Watch team, and thank you to everyone tuned in. I can't see the comments right now myself, but I'm going to go take a peek at them when this is over and say hi to everyone. I'm so excited to join the Harbor Wild Watch team for volunteering when it is safe to do so for public programs, and get back with that and see all of the folks who are in the Harbor Wild Watch community again. I cannot wait. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here.
Well, it's kind of like you just teed me up or something for a perfect segue, because guess what? We are doing our first volunteer training since I don't remember when. It's been way too long. But we are going to start our Peer into the Night programs again this fall. So October 2nd will be our first Peer into the Night in person back on the docks. We'll have scuba divers in the water and our ROV camera documenting, what's living under the dock, and we'll project that on a screen, and either myself or Rachel will narrate what we're seeing, wondering about, teach you some fun things about the critters, and of course have our fabulous volunteers working the touch tanks to get you a hands-on experience with some of the cool critters we find living in the Puget Sound. If you're interested in being one of those volunteers, on September 30th, the last day of September, so almost October, we'll be meeting at Jarosich Dock at 6:30 p.m. I'll drop a link in the comments for that sign-up genius to RSVP for that, but we would love to get folks trained up. It's been so long, so we want to dust off the cobwebs for that kind of stuff and get you trained and ready to go. And of course, again, Make Waves is coming up on Thursday the 23rd. If you haven't registered for that, there is still time. You even have time to get our fun little gift box, so you can have some fun little treats, our annual pin, as well as some new makings for our signature cocktail of the night. So definitely go check that out. We only do this fundraiser once a year, and Harbor Wild Watch is funded through grants and donations, and that is a big donation part of our season. So we appreciate the support, whether it's sharing that with other friends who might be able to attend or attending yourself. So can't do it without y'all. So big cheers to all of those folks. Tune in for that. Otherwise, it sounds like I think that's a wrap. There's still more love pouring in through the comments for you, Carly. Great film. Congratulations on Carly and Peter. Just thank you again so much for being part of our 2021 Cocktails and Fishtales season. It's such a treat.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love presenting, and hello to everyone out there. Thanks for the love, everyone.
Yeah, we look forward to more in-person stuff. So until then, stay safe. And as always, learn, have fun.